Hello and welcome to the Lively Faith Podcast. I am your host, the Reverend Nathan Stomberg, Rector of Holy Communion Anglican Church in East Greenwich, Rhode Island, and today I'm joined by my co-host, the Reverend Mark Galloway. Before we get started, we would love to stay in touch with you. Why not click the link in the description and join our email list? We'll send you occasional emails about new episodes and other important updates. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Mark, did you know at the time of this recording, we have over 5,000 downloads, over 600 regular listeners, and counting. So thank you for your help, Mark, and thank all of you, dear listeners and viewers, for your support, and we thank God for his continued blessings. So today, believe it or not, is our 12th episode. It's going to release on the 1-year anniversary of Lively Faith, and all glory be to God, for sure. And I want to take some time to reflect on that. So I want to start by just looking back at some of our favorite moments and topics we've discussed. So, Mark, I'm going to ramble on for a few minutes about some of my favorite moments. And if you've taken any joy from listening to me drone on and on in the last 12 months, feel free to share what's come to mind.
I think it's actually the opposite, but I'll do that.
As for one of my favorite things, there's a few favorite moments for me. Talking about generational differences, and I think that's something that's really resonated with our audience as well. It's something that we don't really think too much about, but just how different generations see the world, looking at the world through a different lens, even just the way we approach topics. I think it's come about on this show. And the topics that come to mind are just so different between what is at the top of your mind versus what's at the top of my mind. And then the different ways in which we're able to engage on those topics. I think a perfect example of that, and a favorite moment of mine, was trying to explain cryptocurrency to you, or artificial intelligence. It's like I'm speaking in a different language to you.
It was.
And at the same time, when you're telling me about rural Exeter in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, that's not even a world I ever would have imagined being part of the Rhode Island experience. So I don't know if you picked up on anything similar to that.
Oh, absolutely. I think it was for both of us, it was startling to some extent, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And I think it's been exasperated, the generational changes with social media, and I'm the last of the baby boomers. You're like a middling millennial, right?
I am on the cusp at the end of the millennial generation. I would consider myself a late millennial.
So we're like a generation and a half apart.
Yeah.
By those artificial standards. And we're shaped by experience, and I think that's what just keeps being reiterated to me in these conversations. And I don't think, I know they don't go on enough where there's just cross-fertilization between these generations about a whole plethora of topics. And so instead of having rational and certainly peaceful conversation about issues, and certainly in the socio-political realm, they become this endless confrontational counterpunch fight where the goal is just victory, not actually understanding where the generations are at on certain issues. And
we care so much more about victory and being right over being able to have a dialogue.
Right. Even if we know we're not right, as long as we think we've triumphed in the battle, if you will, or of crushing our older or younger generational opponent, then
scoring points.
Yeah, it's obviously ungodly and immature, but it you don't have to go far. Every day when you listen to diatribe on social media, radio, television, cable, wherever you get your information, you see these strategies just employed with really no logical strategy to their conclusion other than gaining points and more viewers and more sponsorship. And it's a very sick system, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's certainly unwell. And going back to what you were just saying, the rate of technological change has definitely exacerbated the differences between generations. So I don't know that if you were to go back even 100 years, let's say 200 years, you wouldn't see as many distinct lifestyle changes, I think, from one generation to the next. And maybe you did to some extent, certainly after the Industrial Revolution, but with the rate of change of technology, things are adapting and changing so fast that we've already moved on to the next thing before we've even understood the previous thing.
That's right. I think I had a priest colleague friend. We were good friends. He wasn't a lot older than me. I would say he was 15 years older than me, somewhere between 10 and 15 years. And this was before the avant-garde of social media. We both were working with primitive computers early in our priesthoods and all that type of stuff. But he was a Vietnam generation child, and I was a Reagan kid. But those things shaped completely our views of the world and our understanding of social politics at the time. This would have been in the mid-'90s. And so it wasn't driven by social media, but it was driven by the generation we came to maturity in, certainly to age in. And so as a Reagan kid and a person who had Reagan conservative values, that didn't mesh with him, even though we were both on the Orthodox side of issues within the denomination and stuff. So they were there, but they're not as deep as they were, and they're not infiltrated by all this false information coming through social media that you get today. So I think your challenges, both up and down in generational conversations, are just much more difficult than I would have been having at your age, 29, 30 years ago. There's no doubt in my mind about that.
And I'm even just thinking about how different life itself looks from generation to generation. Like if you were to go back to, and maybe this is just historical ignorance on my part, but if I think about, someone growing up in 1710 versus growing up in 1740, let's say, how certainly there were changes that they would have thought would be radical between those 3 decades. But when you zoom out and look at it on a historical scale, life really, up until the Industrial Revolution, was largely the same as it had been.
Right. No, that's right. And I mean, take that 30-year window. You were colonial subjects of the crown, nothing really agricultural society. There was very little change at all to anything. Heck, 30 years is an eternity now, right? In the change. I mean, as we're going to discuss in this podcast, just from your first conversation with me about artificial intelligence to now, which is 5 months ago, maybe, or something like that. It's already moved a meteoric distance.
Right.
So it's just other. It's other than.
And even hundreds of years ago, 1710 to 1740, you hit 30, you were practically an old man at that point, or approaching it anyway.
Yeah, life expectancy. 50?
Yeah.
Somewhere in that range. So, yeah, definitely.
But we were just talking before we started recording, perfect microcosm of this is trying to get your prescription filled. You think about elderly people, older people, and the frustrations that they have to face with a changing healthcare landscape and rapid changes in technology. Like you were just saying, 40, 50 years ago, or 40 or 50 years, you could just go walk down the street, go to the pharmacy, hand them the money, and they would give you your prescription. Maybe there was some basic insurance, obviously, to go through, but nowadays you go up there and either they can't fill it, there's some new obscure requirement, and you have to go and talk to a robot on the phone.
Right, which is what happened to me this week. But I'm such a premature fossil that I still bring the expired what do you call it, container with me. And I was there 2 days ago, and she goes, "You're the only person who does this," including people much older than myself. I said, "Well, I don't want to advance too quickly into into modernity." But yeah, it took. I couldn't even do it. They wouldn't. My insurance company wouldn't accept the prescription, even though I had gotten it the month before, and it was a Parkinson's prescription. And I'm like, "What's the deal? You got to call this number." And I knew my brain was already starting to fry just thinking about it. So my wife did it last night as the savior, but it took her 2.5 hours, which means it would have taken me at least 2.5 weeks.
Yeah.
If I didn't jump off the top of the roof before I finished doing it.
It reminds me of an interesting conversation I was listening to just yesterday, actually. I was listening to Pints with Aquinas, and they were discussing how technology, artificial intelligence especially, but elements of our technology have taken away our agency and our volition, in a sense that we listen to narratives online and we listen to media. It replaces our internal monologue. But also, if you think about trying to call someone at a call center or a support center on the phone, there's no practical difference between yelling at the phone, at the robot on the phone, trying to speak to a real person, and speaking to the real person themselves, because the person at the call center now is limited to that same script, which is really just pre-programmed into the AI. And they're limited to, well, it can give you option A or option B. And even though we have the real answer to what you're looking for somewhere within this call center, obviously someone must know how to fill my prescription. We can't give you that information because the script doesn't point me that way.
Right. I think for Christians, we can break it down even to much more simpler things, right? A retired priest friend of mine is living in Dallas, and he was visiting relatives in Pittsburgh this week, and he had sent me a text about something, and then I said, "I'll give you a call." He goes, "No," he goes, I'll call you when I get back to Dallas." Well, when he got back to Dallas, he texts me. So we ended up with this like 10-minute texting going back and forth. And I thought about it yesterday, is that, texting just isn't the same as conversing with somebody. So even us believers, it's like we're asleep. We're not realizing what we're losing all the time. When you're not hearing your friend's voice, or your loved one's voice, your relative's voice, you're not hearing the nuance in the voice. You're not hearing all of these things that we, by a human instincts, pick up and understand in communication. It's just not there in these cryptic messages that are becoming more acronyms than they are even letters and complete sentences. Yeah. It just continues to go in the wrong direction at this constant rate. Just something I picked up just this week thinking about that. And I said, why can't we call each other on the phone and talk for 10 minutes? And the actual conversation took twice as long texting than it would have if you just talked to each other on the phone.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question to think about, right? Because I think there's probably a couple lies that we've been sold. The first is convenience. We've been told that texting someone is more convenient, when I think a lot of times you can exchange, well, frankly, all of the time, you can exchange much more information verbally in a shorter period of time than you could over text. And unless you're sending bytes and chunks of information to someone else, you're really not having a more efficient conversation.
No, I suspect it's become, I think it's unconscious, but for most people, because most people think even get close to this type of depth intellectually, is that you're actually texting so you can avoid certain information.
And so that was the second lie I think we've been sold, is that it's better for us to talk to machines than people. I think we're more comfortable talking to the machine than we are to the human being. Yeah, and that allows you to avoid certain pieces of information, but then you also don't have to engage with all the other aspects of that person. You don't have to worry about making eye contact or devoting your full attention to them. You don't have to worry about changing the intonation in your voice or trying to end the conversation if you need to move on to something else. So I think there's a whole lot wrapped up into that question.
I think it's been a disaster to the pastoral ministry. 20 years ago, pastors started, their parish or congregational blog. So that's how they were going to converse and communicate to their parishioners. And it's a horrific way. And it's shown itself to be horrific because it just doesn't produce quality pastoral care. And so you literally, there's times, I know it's a fact, so pastors end up, sending endless emails or texts to X amount of people in their lives and their pastoral flock when they haven't even had a conversation with them one or two times in the whole year. How can that possibly be a biblical model of ministry, right? And it's certainly not following natural law, right? No. Right? We're made to communicate with each other. We're made to commune. Humans, uniquely in all of creation, are meant to do this. And without it, we are less for it. In fact, we are less human all the time when we are not doing this to our fullest capacity. And when not only not doing our fullest capacity, we're doing it to less and less capacity all the time. So it makes us less efficient and less like the image of God.
Yeah.
Right? Who wanted to communicate with us so much, he became incarnate.
Right. It's a very warped facsimile that we transform ourselves into, because as we move closer to community, let's say, or you move closer to technology, you move farther from the image of God, because we're remaking ourselves in the image of the God we've created, which resides within the technology itself.
Yeah. What percentage of Christians and congregations and parishes, whatever it's called in the particular tradition, are still worshiping virtually since the COVID pandemic, right? And certainly even when they've gone back to actual worshiping as a community, they still have this significant percentage of, quote, their family, parish family, who hasn't even been back in the same facility with you, but continues to watch things online. It's not good. It's terribly bad, right? And it just will continue to fracture and disintegrate what Christian community is, what koinonia is all about, right? And it certainly, those who belong to liturgical traditions just get further and further separated from the sacramental and grace-filled reality of what community is supposed to be. So, it's so deep, this conversation.
All of this stuff, too, is part of the reason why I'm so grateful to be working back in the office full-time. I have the flexibility to work virtually, and it's nice to have the option for when it's convenient, but it's so much better to interact face-to-face. You can exchange information so much more quickly, and it restores the value to the work that you're doing. You're no longer just a widget in a machine, a virtual machine somewhere, exchanging bytes of text over a screen. Now you're back to engaging in real community, which people don't want to admit is an essential part of work, and it gives it much more dignity that way.
I mean, even from a secular point of view, right? To take the whole Judeo-Christian perspective away from it, it's just bad commerce. It's bad. It's bad for capitalism. It's bad for culture and society, right? Workers will never be as productive when there's nobody watching them.
Right.
When you're not accountable, when you're not in community working on projects, right? There's too much dead time. You're paying people for not working for a huge percentage, even if they're telling you they are. It's just not going to be true. So it's not good. It's not good for just economic reasons, for the good of the country, the psychology of the workforce, all of these things. And so there's so much more to it. So it's not just us speaking the theological component of it. There's this massive sociological component to it that clearly, to me, has shown itself to be such a problem. And with young people, my brother wanted to, my brother owns several businesses, but hiring, this was a young lady, it could have been any gender, of course, but it comes in. But this whole point is that he found out she couldn't communicate except in like broken sentences and like this cryptic language that she's used to texting and all the other social media things that I don't know about. You keep reminding me that how people communicate. And he's like, my gosh, he goes, I'm just looking for somebody who can communicate with a customer that comes in and then actually can count the change out of the drawer to give back to him. And it's as simple as that, right?
Yeah.
You can't run the most basic parts of commerce in this country without the ability to communicate, and to do it at least with some modicum of decency and joy and kindness. So it's very deep, isn't it?
Yeah, it runs very, very deep.
You ask this, so you start with this little question,
Right.
and all the tentacles.
It goes on and on.
Goes on and on and
Just
on.
to wrap that train of thought back up, I think it was a very productive diversion, if we could even call it that, is, again, the rate of change of society is too fast for us to adjust and then
Way
get
too
our
fast.
bearings. So we, again, to rip off Frat again, we don't realize the poverties of these new technologies until they're too late.
Yes, all of us. I'm as guilty as anybody else.
Yeah,
You know?
no exception.
And as you say, I barely know anything about any of it. But just the texting piece alone, I think that incident with my priest friend in Dallas really just kind of hit me. It's like, why are we doing this? I don't even have the answer to that. It just becomes habit.
Yeah, I think it would do all of us a lot of good if we, every once in a while, stopped and asked ourselves that question.
Yes.
So outside of that, the generational differences, especially, I've learned a lot about Orthodoxy in our conversations with our brother Corey. I think that was another favorite of mine. That was a part of the Christian experience, let's say, and Christian history that I certainly was ignorant of, and we received a lot of good feedback from our listeners and viewers too, that it's really, if you're part of the Western Christian experience, especially in America, the Orthodox experience, the beauty and the fullness of it just totally doesn't enter your purview. And you really just think of it as an icon or play of words. There's a false image in your mind, a caricature of what you think it actually is.
This weird group of people living in an ancient past.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, and I think, again, from my training, both from because I was interested in it, but we certainly got more training in Eastern Christianity and it's comparing and contrasting with Western Christianity and why they divided. In evangelicalism, there's a tremendous dearth of any, and that's not new. It's been there for for centuries even. And so, I think those, from the feedback, those podcasts did resonate with, I suspect, non-Catholics and non-Anglicans.
Yeah.
To a significant extent, these people just aren't weirdos. It's like rooted in, they go back to the beginning of Christianity.
Right.
Right? They didn't, I think Corey does a very fine job, and it's charitable to the kin of saying, listen, we're not the ones who aren't aware of fact and history. It's you who aren't aware of fact and history, right? Other than whenever your history goes back to in your particular denomination, which most of America are post-Civil War. I mean, certainly the whole non-denominational movement's 50 years old, right? It's not exactly deeply rooted in 2,000 years apostolic tradition. So the one that I was glad, but I'm not surprised about, I think it was our biggest response, certainly at the YouTube level, was why Catholicism matters.
Yeah.
And I think that resonated hugely with, I suspect, our Roman Catholic brothers and sisters in Rhode Island, with like cultural facts that they live out every day, but never really connected the dots. That this is all reality about living in the most Catholic state in the country and how it's affected everything about jurisprudence, government, policing, local county government, political parties, all of those things, and the shadow of the Catholic influence on all of Rhode Island, including on the Protestant aspects of it. And so I was really taken by the Catholic responses to our, like, hey, I was like, it was like Rip Van Winkle woke up or something from.
Yeah, I appreciate episodes like that where the audience on YouTube engages with us. We had a few positive comments there. There's always spam and negative comments that pop up too, but episodes like that in particular, you get a few people who stumble upon the video and they reach out and they say, wow, I really enjoyed this. I look forward to listening to it. Sometimes they subscribe. So you can tell when it strikes a chord with a new audience.
Right. And actually that was our most ripe sociological demographic to have hit a topic on, I think, in the last year. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So 1 year anniversary, we're looking at the highlights. What else has surprised you this year? It could be with a podcast. It could be outside of the podcast. Think about the span of time that we've covered recording these episodes. I'll start so you can have some time to think about that. For one, I think just the success and the reception of the show and the new relationships that have been able to form because of it. Obviously, it's all God's doing, but I started really with no grand designs for my own pride, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that's always hidden under the surface, but thank God, I think he's protected me from that. So it was never for self-aggrandizement. It was always just to make the most effective and efficient use of my time and talents. And if God saw fit to use it, then more glory to him, right? So with the audience that we've seen, and it continues to grow, and how well it's been received, it's been massively encouraging. And I thank God for that and continue to thank him for it.
Yeah, I mean, all this technology, like just setting up, Josh, all the stuff you just did for the last hour to get ready for this.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole thing, the whole milieu of all of this technology, and it's all amazing to me, and that it's a whole venue and avenue of sharing what's most important in our lives, the gospel, in a way. When I was your age, 29-year-old priest, we couldn't have even comprehended that it would ever exist, right? It was, I was just getting my first computer in our parish when I was 29 years old, right? It was really a glorified word processor as much as anything else. So, yeah, I think the thing that strikes me most and is most surprising, or most jolting more than surprising, is that even though we're in our 12th episode, is that how quickly and always we're behind the curve in information. It's just, when we talk beforehand with each upcoming episode, and as our viewers know, maybe don't know, we already have 2 in the hopper that's already going to be going. So they'll be hearing something we taped 2 months ago or whatever when it gets on YouTube or wherever, is that there's already incredible events in the course of history in the church and social politics that have happened since we met last. And when you're designing this show and we're discussing it with Corey and I, like, how do we even sift through what to talk about?
Yeah.
And then when we get 2 or 3 months ahead, I'm like, wow, we should have hit this, and we didn't. But obviously we're not clairvoyant. And so I think that's what struck me the most about the challenge of doing this ministry is that unless you literally did it every week, you couldn't stay on top of everything.
It really gives you an appreciation for those whose job or vocation it is to dissect and stay on top of current events like that, particularly in the Christian sphere. It's a lot of work. And
It is.
I think that was one thing that I've learned or was also shocking to me or surprising was how much time and effort goes into making a humble show such as this. And it's easy to look at someone on YouTube or pull up a show and to think, oh, yeah, well, I could do that piece of cake. And perhaps you could, but in order to do something well, it takes a lot of time and effort. But going back to what you were just saying, too, it's funny because back in the months before we just started around this time last year when this episode releases, you and I were talking, and you were telling me, oh, well, we really got to make sure that we don't run out of topics to discuss. We started out with a relatively small list, and there was some concern there. And I remember telling you, like, just you wait. There's going to be no shortage of things.
You were right, my son. About. You were right.
And now the list grows. It feels every month faster than what we can talk to. So we just have to do our best to discern through prayer as to what the most appropriate topic is at the time.
Well, I reflect back on it now. It's more like our conversations, lots in your training in your early days in the priesthood was about our preaching, is that preaching can't be about, weekly preaching isn't about staying up with the news. It's about being faithful to the lectionary and what Mother Church wants us to proclaim to our flock, because the Word of God is always relevant. And so I think for people doing podcasts and even people bigger than us, the Trad and all these other people that do it well, is that you just don't become a newsreel.
Right.
And that's a difficult challenge to stay out of, because that's what so much of these internet shows and people are about. They're about riling up like-minded people around political issues. And that's not what our goal is to do that at all. We have to bring those things in to ultimately speak about what we believe the Lord's put on our hearts, is that, God in Christ is sovereign.
Mm-hmm.
He's Lord of all of this stuff, and that His word is eternal. It's not changing. God's will for the universe hasn't changed. It cannot change, and which is the most countercultural thing we say every single time we gather to give this podcast, is that God, God's the same yesterday, today, and forever, and all the answers to every dilemma that you're facing in the audience and in your family and the culture, there's already a remedy for it, right? But fewer and fewer people in our culture by the day believe that. And that's our great challenge, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it was a very wise piece of advice that our brother Corey gave to us early on, that we have to be aware of becoming a current events reaction podcast. We're not doing that. We want to, for sure, discuss a variety of topics, and current events can be a good teaching tool, but we have to talk about ideas and how ideas relate to the spread of the gospel, and the gospel at the core of our lives.
Right. We talked about it many times, and this is a true axiom about being an effective preacher, pastor, theologian, is that our job isn't to ever tell people what to think, how to think ideologically, politically, socially, how they're supposed to vote. Our job is to inform their moral conscience through the scriptures and the tradition of the church.
Yep.
That's our job. That's our vocation. That is the vows we took in ordination. It isn't to make them good Democrats or good Republicans or independents or libertarians or any of that stuff. And unfortunately, that's what people want us to do. At least a significant section of them want us to do.
Yes.
It's like, I like what they said about this, but I don't like what they're saying about that. It's like the whole church's constant social teaching about the poor,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yes, church and therefore civilization has a moral obligation to the poor. But at the same time, able-bodied people have a moral obligation to work, right? So there's always this symbiotic balance that Mother Church has to be presenting to a culture that almost never likes either side of the message, right? And our job is to constantly reiterate what the church has taught since the beginning about these things, whether they're sexual mores or work or immigration or the existence of God or grace or whatever it may be, gender roles, all of these things. I think the hard thing is you and I are always vulnerable because people are going to take it as if it's our opinion as opposed to revealed truth that we're just conveying. Like, oh no, that's Nathan's
Right.
opinion of what a male is or what a female is. No, it's just what God's revealed what these things are, right? And you just got to have thick skin and get beyond that if you're going to actually be faithful to a calling as a priest or pastor or minister, whatever your tradition is today, and realize you're going to take your lumps in the culture, but that's not, you're supposed to be able to do that. The cross is heavy, and God's going to give us what we need to fulfill our vocation, as he says through St. Paul. So a lot of surprises in this ministry. Even after 30 years in ministry before this,
Yeah.
I'm learning, well, you're just learning like a baby again, Mark. So so it is.
Another thing I wanted to touch upon as we reflect on 1 year of Lively Faith is actually predictions, or a prediction that we made early on when we were talking about artificial intelligence. I think some people like to try and predict how things are going to happen in the year to come. But as we were discussing artificial intelligence, I was saying how we're going to see this explode, and it's going to be an integrated, commonplace part of our daily lives before the end of the year. And so here we are at the time of this recording, even before the end of 2023, and artificial intelligence is all over the place. Heck, you can't open up a website or any app without an AI chat bot popping up, which, by the way, I don't even see the utility of those things. I don't know if anybody ever really uses them, but it's become the it thing. So you have to integrate artificial intelligence into whatever your product is at this point.
Well, it's stunning to me because you're the one who obviously had the acumen around that topic when we were dealing with it, and your predictions were right and more and beyond right. Mostly, I just had my mouth open with flies coming out of it because I didn't. It was all just new information to me, but it is incredible. Just in a relatively minor purview, every once in a while about artificial intelligence, it's how much it's permeated our lives in the last 5 months. Again, it's stunning to me. It's just stunning.
The technology has advanced to the point now. We were talking about image generation and text generation. Now video generation is really that next horizon, and I think within the centers of development, within the companies that artificial intelligence is being developed, they're already well on their way to really sophisticated artificial video generation, where you can input a prompt via text and have it generate a totally new video for you based on what you tell it.
And it's devious. And I do remember that at the end of that recording, I went back and watched it a couple of weeks ago, trying to look somewhat intelligent today, was that I did say that, like all advancements in technology, when it was nuclear power, everything can be used for good or evil.
Right.
And I maybe did you see that this week? So this whole artificially intelligence produced Bible.
I didn't.
Yeah,
didn't
it's
see
like
that.
not in the Bible, but like Jesus said this. And,
Oh, I did see that.
and then
It's
all of
like
a sudden people are quoting it and using it
it's
like,
an app, right? And you can talk
yeah,
to
right.
characters of the
And they
Bible.
actually think this is part of sacred deposit. And so they're arguing with these other people why you're wrong about, of course, all the predictable issues in our culture. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So you're going to have just millions of people who have never read the scriptures, right? But will talk to their app and Jesus that never existed is going to tell them this, and it's going to sound in perfect Elizabethan English even, right?
Yeah.
And they're going to believe it. And that's how much harder and more difficult it's going to be to sift through all of that to get to the real truth.
Yeah.
Right? And it's exactly how the devil works, of course, right? So that struck me this week, and that's just one little tiny example.
Yeah.
Never mind all how my wife being a chair of nursing around in college, how many students are cheating and right from just last year, what they had to think about what was going on. It's like, and then all the checks and balances trying to figure out how are you going to ever stay up and ahead of what actually a student's going to produce. I don't think you're going to.
You're going to need technology to assist you in that. It's like anything else where
Which will
technology can be used
and blah,
for good
blah,
or bad,
blah,
but
blah,
yeah,
blah.
it'll increase costs because really then you're going to have an industry of
It's like police.
it's like policing, or it's like cybercrime versus cybersecurity. You're going to be in an arms race like anything else between technologies used to forge work or to cheat and technologies using artificial intelligence in order to detect cheating. It was the same concern as with Photoshop when Photoshop first came out, being able to develop technology to tell whether or not an image was genuine or not. And so all those same conversations continue.
But there's nothing new under the sun. It's a false god, right? And so this is the evil one's newest adventure into projecting a false god, right? It's no different to those who sat on the top of the Tower of Babel and thought they had conquered God, right? And it's just the next chapter.
Next chapter, yeah.
Except the pages flip over in the chapters so fast now, as opposed to in the past,
Yeah.
Might take a week to get through a chapter. Now you get through a chapter in 3.6 seconds or something.
Yeah, you're just opening the book and flipping through the pages.
Right.
On the flip side of that coin, not so much a prediction that we made, but maybe reality bearing its ugly head is with cryptocurrency. I think when we released the episode talking about cryptocurrency, it was really at its peak. It was just before the edge of the cliff, let's say. And all of the topics that we talked about with regard to easy money and the edifice of cryptocurrency being a facade has all come to bear since then. Those valuations have come crumbling down. You see by the month, by the week even, new people being outed in terms of fraud because at the end of the day, so much of it, if not all of it, was a giant Ponzi scheme,
Right.
just segmented between different
Right.
types of digital currency. So while we never made a prediction about what cryptocurrency was or wasn't going to become, natural law and nature, human nature, continue to bear themselves out with predictable consequences.
So Bitcoin's not going to replace the American dollar as the international currency.
Not anytime soon.
Right. And I can remember a conversation with somebody we know well's brother. Boy, he had 8 or 9 years ago he was convinced that was going to be the future, and wrong.
Yeah.
Wrong, right? But again, you think about that. I think we talked about it. You're talking about Bitcoin isn't even real money. It's not backed by anything or any government or anything. So how is that ever logically going to really change the course of
There's no
international commerce?
no store of real value. And again, there were some intelligible arguments that were made for it, but unless you had a large scale, widespread adoption of it, with everyone collectively buying in, it's never going to replace anything.
Well, the average schmo working the mill is never going to be doing that, right?
Right.
Risking his marginal life subsistence already on Bitcoin wasn't going to be part of that reality. So, the beautiful people get ahead of themselves, don't they? And it bites them in the derriere, and rightfully so.
Yeah. So enough about the predictions. I also was reflecting on what I've learned about podcasting, touched upon this. I was interested, especially from your wise, tenured perspective, Mark, what you've learned about podcasting. For me, it was definitely the setup. We experienced that in force today. Our fearless producer, Josh, helped see us through the storm. But beyond the setup work, I think it's just you need backup plans to your backup plans to your backup plans. We were just saying how every month when we meet to record, there's always a new, totally unique problem that crops up with the technology. And just when you think you have it all figured out, well, it's something else. Oh, the video isn't coming through. The audio isn't coming through. Oh, you forget to plug something in. It's all part of the process.
What I've learned is whatever. Let's say pick whoever, the most erudite, effective communicator, preacher. If we had Fulton Sheehan here, or Dr. Graham, Adrian Rogers, whoever you want from the last 50 years of great men who have preached the gospel from their tradition, they'd all be as dumb as I am sitting here. The only way they could do it, A, they would have more resources, but B, is if they actually went out, recruited all the help of younger generations of the acumen, the desire, the knowledge to do this. There's no 60-year-old rookie who's going to step in and be able to do what you and Josh just did. Forget it, because it would take a full-time job to learn how to do it. My learning curve would take forever. I'm going to be 60. I'd be 70 before I figured out what would be 10-year-old technology. Right. So to me, what you've learned is actually substantial and actually has cause and effect. What I've learned is just how dumb I am.
Oh, well, there's another thing I don't understand.
Yeah, well, exactly. It's like, how come nobody is interested when I'm interested in?
Where'd everybody go? Oh, Nathan and Josh are talking nonsense again.
Exactly. And but there's something refreshing about that too. But it's also, it takes humility, and that we all reach a Peter principle in these areas of our lives, right? And so, I mean, I'm old for you guys, but it's not like I'm not 100, right? I mean, I was in grad school at Yale 30 years ago, but I was still in I'd go to the basement of the library at Yale and look up all the information in old books and write them on note paper. That's how I went to grad school. Yeah. Right? And that's 30 years ago. So we're not talking 1920, or I was hanging out with Abraham Lincoln, Yeah. It's 1992 I was there. So, but the humility is, for whether you're in the ministry or any industry, is realizing it's not about your intelligence, it's about where you're born in time and space and what your experience is. And if you can't come to the realization there's people more talented than you and better than you at areas, especially in Christian ministry, you're not going to be an effective leader. That was true when I was a bishop or as a priest or as a rector, as you are now. As technology improved and I had multiple staff people, I had priests that were much better at areas of ministry than me. I think a gift God gave me was be able to see that they had those areas that were better than me and let them do it. There's the guys that just can't do that. They need to think they're better or smarter than that. We've met people, you and I have colleagues.
Oh, yes, we have.
And we've battled with them, but they have to be the smartest guy in the room about everything. And the only thing I'm the smartest guy in this room right now is baseball statistics. That's it. That's all I'm the smartest guy about, right? And I think you have to be able to use humor that way if you're going to be effective in sharing what's best for the common good and for the body of Christ. That's why St. Paul uses those analogies about the body and how important each member of the body is. But
So true.
If the church doesn't get her act together from the local assembly on up through the levels of hierarchy in the different traditions and denominations and start dispersing talent, it's going to have a very difficult time.
To be able to say, I don't understand that, and that's okay, is or must be a tremendously freeing thing, and is, I think, necessary for all of us to come to that point throughout the course of our lives. Otherwise, you're going to keep butting your head against the wall.
Yes. We've talked about this, and many times. It's like vocation in the Christian endeavor in the Christian church. There are many people who want to be something, and usually they want to be on top of the pyramid, right?
Yeah.
So I want to be a priest, or I want to be the bishop. I would rather be a this and the deacon or that. Or it's not you can't smash round pegs into square holes in the church,
Nope.
right? God gives us a charism. God gives us a calling, and it's confirmed in two ways: through your praying through it, and by the church herself's affirmation of that calling. It's not you who tell the church, hey, you know what? I should be the bishop. I'm going to be the best bishop ever, right?
Look how confident I am.
Look at me, right? And no, it's the church who decides through her collective wisdom whether you have that charism.
Right.
It's not about you. You can't foist it onto the church. Matter of fact, you're not even being a faithful Christian in doing that, right? Our most important and most profound vocation as a Christian is the fact that we're baptized. That alone equips us with everything we need to share the gospel effectively in the world.
Mm.
And you don't need titles and all these letters after your name. Nobody cares about all the letters after my name. And today, all it's going to cost you is a lot of money that you're never going to be able to pay back. So, humility is invaluable virtue, especially in technologically driven world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Speaking of humility, I wanted to spend some time reflecting on things that we've improved on or things that we can continue to work on better as a show as we continue to seek to improve in prayer and in patience. I think for me, and just thinking about where we've come, how we started, conversational rhythm and comfort, just the basics, the fundamentals of podcasting. And Josh, you had some great advice for this months ago as we were talking about what you do on YouTube and how we've changed, and just the look, the feel, the confidence has changed from our first few episodes to now. There's just a cadence and a comfort to speaking to a microphone and in front of a camera that you can't really pick up on until you've done it for a few months, and you have to be comfortable making mistakes and tripping up along the way. And I think it's really cool that we've been able to share this journey with our audience as well, especially for those faithful viewers who have been with us since the very beginning. We're super thankful for you. And
Yes.
I think hopefully it's just as rewarding for all of them to see our journey and our transformation as we learn to navigate this new medium.
Yeah, I think the evolution, going back and watching the different podcasts, and is that who you really are comes out.
Yeah.
I think we start out with, like we always do, in a new job, you bit artificial. You got your plastic suit on, you're almost an automaton, right?
Yeah.
When you start out, but I think when your personality comes out and the authenticity of who you are, people who are drawn to your authenticity and the information you are disseminating are going to continue to tune in. But I think being real is the most important thing. Even if you disagree with a person, I've always found this in my life. I don't have to agree with you to like you. Matter of fact, I usually like people more who disagree with me than agree with me
Yeah.
in life on things. And so I think the ability to laugh at yourself and be authentic is really so important. But also, I think what's worked well in this format is that you host, you're doing you're doing the perfect thing that you should be doing. Right? Not only was this your brainchild, but you're excellent at coming up with these outlines, topics, keeping me especially, and then Corey on subject. Right? We don't go too far down rabbit holes, and you have a very kind way of dragging us back, which behind the scenes,
of course,
I would know meant like, "Hey, shut up, dude."
Yeah.
You know. So, yeah, you got to be in the right role.
Yeah, it's a challenge. It's a good challenge, and for me, the temptation, especially early on, is to conduct the show in such a way that makes it flow, that makes the conversation genuine, but keeps us moving forward. But fighting the tension between being genuine and letting my personality show through versus trying to present the image in my head of what I think a Christian podcaster should look and sound like. And when you're trying to project an image of yourself, people pick up on that very quickly. And that's what differentiates the popular shows, the successful shows, from perhaps the less successful ones, is that that genuine nature.
Yes. I suspect your challenge, let's say we have 5 of us around this table. You got a veteran Roman Catholic priest, you got a fundamentalist Baptist who's got 40 years of ministry, me and you as Anglicans, a classic Calvinist sitting over here. Your role would be immensely more difficult.
Oh, yeah.
And then would those men gathered on this table have enough humility and respect for each other to be able to have sincere conversation and with mutual admiration and affection? I've been in ministry 25 more years than you. You've already learned that's not very easy, right? And it's not easy, right? So to find a group of men that secure in themselves, that after X amount of years in the ministry, they realize they've made mistakes, done lots of good things for the kingdom of God, would have done a lot of things different, but can come back here and gather with brothers in Christ. Ultimately, it's Jesus that unites us, and share with each other information that would actually mutually build up each other is something that I would want to tune into. I'm not interested in listening to 5 guys who all think they're smiling at each other and trying to outpoint them each other on some nuance of theology. How many angels couldn't you put on the head of a pin?
Right. Yeah.
Right? I'm not interested in that. Right. I know I have too many flaws.
Yeah.
And you heard me say a million times, despite all my quote success and academia in different areas, the only thing I've ever conquered in life is loafing and sinning.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
The 2 things that I'm best at.
the 2 things I'm best at. So everything else is just God's grace. And not everybody's comfortable with a personality like that.
No.
Right. And that's been true in my ministry. Like he's too real at times. And if I'm gonna err, I'll err to that side as opposed to this self-righteous side.
Yeah.
The other thing that's been the best and the best surprising is how Josh just loves my jokes. And he's writing a compendium of all of them.
Yeah, you're the first person to laugh at his jokes.
Yeah. So Josh, I
Keep
love
up
you,
the
man.
good work, man.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh man. So what can we get better at? I think really just continuing to grow in the fundamentals. I see room for improvement. Microphone technique kind of jumps out the most at me. I think that was probably something we had the least experience with, and obviously until by God's grace, if he sees it fit to bless us with a permanent studio, it's going to be hard to get the perfect microphone setup. But you've been doing a fine job today. I'm not saying
I'm getting better.
You're getting better. I've been getting better too. If you
you've always been better than me. So.
It's all relative to our own skill level, I suppose.
You go.
But if you listen to those earlier
and IQ,
episodes,
I think.
you realize how sensitive the microphone is and trying to adjust the gain just right. So if you're over here versus up really close to the microphone, you realize how sensitive It is, especially when you're listening for that sort of thing.
Right.
So
Yeah, I noticed that listening to myself. I'm the one whose voice trails on and off because my head's bobbing around. So,
but you've got good reasons for that. You've got the spirit of Stevie Wonder inside you.
I guess so. Yeah. Speaking of venues, next time we record, we won't be in this venue.
That's right. Yeah. So say goodbye to the brick wall for those of you who have enjoyed listening. I think we found a good substitute and we'll make it work. So I'm optimistic about what we'll be able to do there. And
until we have our multi-billion-dollar studio.
Yes, it's only a matter of time at this point. If any of you millionaires or billionaires are listening,
well, I just added up with Joshua's tithe coming to us directly. We'll be able to do it in like 2.5 years. So
that's pretty cool. You're a generous dude.
We're in good shape. We're in good
generous dude. So really the last question here then for us is what's next? We've completed a year of lively faith, looking ahead at the year to come. I think it's best to start with our purpose. I recently refined what I would call our tagline, just distilling down who we are for the audience. Lively faith is frank conversations about living and defending the Christian faith, the Christian worldview. And as we just talked about, I felt called to start this ministry as the most effective, efficient use of time and talents at this stage in my life. I just wanted to be a good steward of that. I knew that this was a medium that was ripe for being used and for being fruitful. And we, as a church and as Christians in the state, really need to take advantage of that. So as I've reflected on getting started and as we've moved through the first few episodes, I've called to mind a quote. I think it's from Jordan Peterson, something that he said before, to paraphrase that if something is truly worth doing, then it's worth the risk of doing it imperfectly. Yes. I think another way to put that is not to let the perfect get in the way of the good enough, which we always want to strive to be the best iteration of what we can be. But very early on, it was easy to get caught up in the temptation of, well, everything has to be just right before we get this show started, or no one's going to listen, or no one's going to want to tune in. And you just have to push through that, you know, we're going to make those mistakes, and we have to rely on the charity and the grace of our listeners to understand that. But on the other side of that coin, like we were just saying, I think the journey makes it that much more endearing. And I've heard that about other shows online as well, that I think it goes back to whether or not you come across as being fake or just being a genuine version of yourself, right, to invite your audience and your listeners into your conversations.
Yeah. I like what you said about Peterson. You know, style is never more important than the message.
Yeah.
We live in a world where people are just facsimiles of themselves, right? Because they're so interested in, so self-consumed with style that authenticity never comes out, right? And so it seems to me this has been a decent, but if we were in a shed, if our audience is seeking, men of God genuinely seeking to share the truth with them, they're going to listen to it. If it's even literally if we're in a shed, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think style, obviously you want to.
It'd have to be a good shed.
It would be a good shed.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. An Amish-built shed.
Oh, yeah. I think an Amish-built shed would be nicer than this place. Yes. Nicer than my apartment, for sure.
But, I mean, you think about it. I think, and it's a disease that's affected the church, especially in the free church. It becomes so much about style, right? So, and I don't want to pick on, I don't want to be pejorative here, but just trying to make an example. So, the pastor with the ripped jeans sitting on his stool is a passing fad, right?
Yeah.
But clearly you've been enamored by style, as if it's the style that's going to make the message more efficacious, and that's simply not true. John Henry Newman, who's one of the greatest saints of the most famous convert from Anglicanism to Roman Catholicism, converted in 1845, died in 1890, became a cardinal before he died. But in many ways, he's the father of the thinking that led up to Vatican II in Catholic thought. His sermons are renowned. They're written out sermons, right? And we have hundreds and hundreds from his Anglican days and Catholic days. But almost to the person, anybody who ever listened was present when John Henry Newman preached. It was the most boring thing in the history of the human race. He read his sermons. He was not charismatic. There was barely an inflection in his voice, right? It was all about the message, right? Now, history, we're removed from style because John Henry Newman, died 135 years ago. But it's his message that has endured, not his style. It's his message. And in the Christian ministry, in the gospel, the kerygma of the gospel, it's the message that's going to endure. Isaiah tells us, right? It's going to last forever.
Yes.
And so getting caught up in style is the wrong thing we take advantage of modern technology and so forth, but we're not here to be celebrities or stars in fact, all of our flames will burn for a while and then they will go out.
It's true.
And they will be replaced by something else, but the message will stay the same. So I think that's one thing I see. The other thing is you have to be bold about the truth. Whatever personality you bring, you have to be bold. The truth cannot change. God's word cannot change. God is immutable. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And if any podcast, any communicator of the gospel is going to succeed to change one soul, it's because they're bold. And so boldness comes out. Now, it has to come out in a form of charity that's not compromising, but it is attractive.
Yeah.
Right? And it's not an easy task, right? I spoke in the last week at an event that was charged. I was asked to do the invocation. And in fact, my son, Donald, when he found out I was speaking at this, he goes, "Why did they pick you?" And I said, "Why do you think they picked me?" He goes, "Because there's nobody else who would have possibly done that," right? And quite frankly, I can't think of anybody on the other side of the table who would have done it.
No way.
And but it is. What are you afraid of? If you're afraid of public opinion and the whole row of protesters were calling me a fascist before I get in the building, then you're not going to be bold for the gospel. And that's just the reality of where we're living. The world's hatred of the gospel is not going to lessen.
No.
It's just going to get stronger and stronger and stronger. So we need more semper fi. We need more good men who are going to be faithful, right? And we have to be bold to say that. And those men who, perhaps from listening to you or I or others that may join us around this table in time, hopefully we can inspire those who have that much courage that they want to be God's man. We have to be bold. We have to be very, very bold.
Yeah, that's really well said.
And the people watching us want us to be bold.
Yeah,
otherwise, they would not be watching us.
People don't seek out timid people to watch.
No.
There's nothing appealing about that.
No.
Well, I think the thing that I'm always constantly telling myself as we go through producing these episodes is that surely God can use my manure to fertilize and grow a beautiful garden. He's proven that time and time again.
Yes. It's true of all of us. It's a good way to see ourselves, right?
Yeah. It's all about that perspective and
Right.
humility. So as we wrap up, I want to just finish by revisiting the vision that I cast forth at the very start of Lively Faith and looking at how that will guide us going forward, how God will use our vision, rather, to guide us going forward. And as I've reflected on it, it really has several elements. It's really refined as we've continued to meet. First and foremost, we want to spread the gospel to equip the saints for the work of ministry. and to help people find deeper meaning in their daily lives, hence the name Lively Faith, which we discussed in great depth in our first episode. The second is to have the spiritual conversations that few others are having, if any, and learn about topics of importance to the Christian worldview. And that's part of where that boldness comes in. Third, I want to expose listeners to the truth and beauty of the great liturgical tradition of the church. And that, again, plays into that unique perspective that we have compared to all the other voices that are out there, where we're not just sitting here talking about our opinions. We are simply reiterating what the church universal has affirmed for millennia. And then lastly, fourth, I want us to be a resource to the faithful, especially in Rhode Island, as we navigate what I would say, and I'm sure you would agree, is a most turbulent and disorienting time in church history, as Christians living in a decaying post-Christian Western civilization. And I'll take that moment to pause and say, if you're listening at this point in the episode, please take the time to click the link and sign up for our email list. That'll be the most effective way for us to stay in touch as this ministry continues to grow and evolve. So I guess to sum that all up, the vision is fourfold, and really at this point it's moving forward in prayer and discernment.
I don't think you can overemphasize what you just said. And I think our sisters and brothers listening, if they haven't fully grasped it, it's every day sinking in deeper and deeper, is that we are in a crisis, in turmoil, unprecedented in the church since the Reformation. And in many ways, it far exceeds the Reformation. Reformation was about, ultimately a disagreement about the authority of the Word of God and the role of sacraments. We're in a time where people on both sides of the Tiber and every Protestant tradition can't even decide what Christian anthropology is.
Yeah.
And whether God's real. I mean, it's vastly more evil. It's vastly more complicated. It's vastly more infiltrated by every element of the world, right? So you'd have to go back in history, like the Arian controversy.
Yeah.
In the 3rd century, about whether Jesus was truly divine, one substance with the Father. It took the church really 400 years to get through that. And then the next was the fall of the Roman Empire.
Right.
Which we're probably not far from. We're within a couple hundred years of that in the West ourselves, right? The American Empire will not last. Americans they don't believe that. They think it's going to last forever.
Yeah.
Right? And when the empire fell, only one thing kept civilization alive.
Which was the church.
It was the church. The church kept everything alive. It kept education alive. It kept language alive. It kept the understanding that loving a neighbor was a natural truth. And eventually, out of the collapse of the Middle Ages, Dark Ages, the Renaissance came, right? Education, all the things we've talked about that were birthed by the church, not by governments. Education, jurisprudence, freedom, equal rights, the role of, right, women having rights in society. It all comes from Mother Church. It's just like Jefferson said, right? Our inalienable rights don't come from the government. They come from the Creator. And so it's this constant, so you had that, and then the Reformation, but what's going on today is just, there's nothing like it that's ever existed in the turmoil in the church. Nothing.
To distill it down, I think what makes our moment in time unique is that the church is struggling and grappling with issues that are so basic and fundamental to natural law, to what it means to be a human being, and the building blocks of Christianity that have always just been taken for granted, or the church has been in widespread agreement on, and has allowed it to continue to exist in strength as an institution throughout the ages. So I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, and obviously, however long in God's providence this podcast goes, those issues will dominate what we talk about over the next year, 2 years, and so forth. And so, in the ensuing months, we'll be talking about what's going to be taking place in Rome, the Synod and Synodality on the Roman Catholic side, which is going to have massive consequences. And that's an understatement. I can't even come up with a big enough word, the consequences that will come out of that. And so it's just, I just pray there's men of the other traditions that are like our friend at Pints and Aquinas. We need an eclectic Orthodox voice across the board that just sticks to basic anthropological truth. That would be a tremendous gift to the cyber church, if you will. But yeah, we're in unprecedented times, and so we just yacked about all the changes that happened just in a year of us doing this. God only knows what we're going to happen in the next.
God only
12
knows.
months.
So as we close, I want to tie us back to Scripture here. A couple verses come to mind. The first is, a gospel passage I preached a sermon on earlier in the season of Pentecost, where St. Peter is talking to Jesus, and Jesus says to Peter, he gives him the keys. He says, "You are Peter, Kepa, on this rock. You are rock, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." And that's an encouragement we need to keep ever present in our minds. But the interesting angle to consider that verse, that phrase, that the gates of hell will not prevail against the church, I think I picked this up from like a Father Mike Schmidt's podcast, is think about gates. When we think about the gates of hell shall not prevail against the church, and you compare it to our emotional and visible reality within current events in the world, does it look like the church is on the attack or on the defense? It feels like the church is on the defense, right? It feels like we're losing. But when you look at that verse and what Jesus says, that the gates of hell will not prevail against it.
I would say it's actually accommodating,
as
opposed to even defending.
Right, but the encouragement is, and this is the point that I made in the sermon, are gates an offensive or a defensive tool?
Defense.
Gates are defensive. You're not picking up a gate and running around and whacking people with it. So even though things look bleak, ultimately, the spiritual warfare we're seeing is because the legions of angels, the church of Christ, is on the offensive, and Christ is ultimately the victor over the forces of evil and darkness. And logically speaking, when you are overcoming the gates of the enemy is going to fight more and more intensely in order to push you back. And so the gates of hell will not prevail.
That's right. Well, it's, I was given this in plaque form when I was ordained. This is true of you. Melchizedek's priesthood lasts for how long?
Eternity.
It's forever. You are a priest forever. You as an individual, the priesthood of believers, but you as a person, individual, your priesthood isn't going to end. And so the devil can't prevail against you. Only one way the devil can prevail against you or any other baptized believer, if you let him.
If you let him. Absolutely.
Otherwise, he has no power over you. Only if you let him have power over you.
That's exactly right.
And that is not held close enough to the heart by most believers.
Yeah.
Right? They're always looking for a superhero to come rescue them.
Yeah.
From behind the bushes. Right? They're going to fix all this and make it. Because after all, church is supposed to be comfortable, right?
Comfortable and easy.
And easy, correct.
Just everything the way I like it. And
yes. The way
never disagree with my opinions.
Yes, the way it used to be, as if the church was not always in a state of change.
Yeah.
It's always has been. It's always been a state of adjustment to cultural reality and everything else. But when you have that myopic of a view of what church is, you're not going to be a very effective disciple, are you? So you're right. I mean, that's awesome. Matthew 16 should be known and read by every Christian, especially at this time in history. Yeah.
And then the last verse that I want to leave us with as we wrap up, Ephesians chapter 3, 20 and 21. Now to him who is able to do far more abundantly than all we ask or think, according to the power at work within us, to him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. Amen.
Amen.
So thank you as always,
Thank you,
Mark,
brother,
for participating in these conversations. Thank you, Josh, for being our fearless producer here. And of course, our thanks to our brother Corey, who couldn't make it today, but couldn't do it without him either. And of course, all thanks and glory be to God. And thank you to our listeners who have been with us through this first year of Lively Faith. And we look forward, God willing, to a great year of lively faith to come.
Yes. Blessings in the new year that'll be ahead.
Thank you very much. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe. God bless. We look forward to seeing you again next time.